happy to be here with you and sharing this awesome real-time FNIRs analysis software, which will help users get to those really cool applications that we just saw some of and more. So Satori really helps to, it's a stepping stone to some very advanced techniques. So I hope you'll enjoy this presentation. So the goals of this webinar, Eric already kind of introduced the specific agenda points, but I just want to reiterate that we have split this webinar series up into 2 parts for a reason. So the purpose of this webinar and this presentation is really to just get you started with the software and show one possible pipeline. The intention is not to show you all that Satori can do because it's a lot. So my goal is just to get you started with the software, to set you up for next week's presentation by Satori's creator, Dr. Michael Lors, which will give a comprehensive tour of the software and a deeper dive into the functionality and kind of show you all that Satori can do. So if part 1 interests you, please be sure to watch part 2. Of course, all of our webinars are recorded, so if you can't get to part 2, no worries, it'll be on our support site later. So some feature highlights. You have seamless connection with NIRx devices with Satori, no additional hardware or headaches. It's as easy as a push of a button, as we'll see later. Many preprocessing options, short channel regression, motion artifact correction, to name 2, among many others. Analysis and statistics. So there's 2 main analysis frameworks that Satori offers, the real-time general linear model, as well as support vector machine learning. And it offers very flexible real-time outputs. So Satori is really, it's focused on getting the analysis right. It does offer some example neurofeedback, BCI little applications, but you can code your own in C++. You can export the data into MATLAB and go from there. So there's a lot of ways you can take the data once it's been analyzed. But you can also use some applications that come with Satori by default, and we'll be seeing a neurofeedback application in this presentation. So licensing, the way licensing works, Satori does require a purchase. You do have it lifetime, but only 1 major release is supported, and that happens every year. So if you wanted to get the newest updates after that year, you'd have to purchase an upgrade. If you're interested in a purchase of the system or a 1-month trial license, you'll send an email to our wonderful sales team at sales@nirx.net. They will prompt you for a serial number for the device, so you do have to have a NIRx device already to use the trial license. And the reason for that is that licenses are bound to a specific device. So you can't use your Satori license on multiple NIRx devices. It's 1 license per device. So just to illustrate that, for example, hyperscanning, which is recording 2 people at once, would require 2 licenses to use Satori. The exception being if you have multiple devices, say 2 NIRSport 2s in tandem to get a 32-32 configuration, that would be just 1 license because you're just imaging 1 person, and that's 1 LSL stream. A note on the licensing, the license name and password are not a physical key. It's not like a dongle. It's going to be a username and password combination. And if you have any questions about the licensing, please shoot us and shoot the question in the question box, and we'll be sure to answer it. Real-time versus simulation mode. So there are 2 options with Satori. You can use the real-time application for real-time analysis. This is, publishable data collection with a subject where you're, presenting them with the neurofeedback, the BCI. Also, there is a Simul mode, and that's the same exact GUI as the real-time mode, except you're going to be replaying old previously collected data. So this allows you to pilot your pipeline ahead of time, and this reads in NIRx data files. You get access to both these applications with a license, and we'll be seeing both today. To use Simul mode, you must connect to the real-time application with your registered device within the past month. That's how the licensing works. And you'll be prompted for that, and it'll be very clear when the time comes to reconnect if you haven't in a while. And note that data is always saved at the end of each run with both real-time and Simul mode. Every single time you run, the processing in Satori, the analysis outputs are included in data files. Turbo Satori support. So you do get plenty of support when you purchase Turbo Satori. That is mainly through Brain Innovation. So we are their partner. And if you have any questions with any of our devices ever, we encourage you to send an email to us at support@nirx.net, and we'll loop in Brain Innovation support as needed. But if it's a really specific question, feel free to directly email Brain Innovation for specific questions to Turbo Satori. But yes, support@NIRx is always here to help. So there's a dedicated support site on the Brain Innovation site that you can follow here. You'll find example code, example data, user guide, and the user guide is actually also embedded in the application, which is how I use it because it's very easy to access. So I'd recommend using that as well. Okay, I want to follow. So here are two links for installing and then Brain Innovation support. So I want to follow this link and we'll have a look at the installer. So we're here on the NIRx support site. If you're not familiar, the NIRx support site, the hyperlink is support.nirx.de. I'm on the software page just by clicking up here to this navigation portal and coming down to Turbo Satori. So this is where you'll find the installer for Turbo Satori. Just click it right here. You'll also find a copy of the user manual, user guide, a link to their support site, and the exact paradigm that we'll be using later. So we'll be using a finger tapping paradigm later. It's our standard finger tapping paradigm. But to use Turbo Satori, we do have to use a specific triggering sequence. So it includes that. So when you're using your trial, you're using your license, you can start with this paradigm to get kind of started with the software. And this is a PsychoPi paradigm. Okay, coming back to the presentation, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and now we're going to talk about FNIRS analysis. So I really want to kind of go through the critical FNIRS analysis concepts, which will set us up and make us sure that we know exactly what we're looking for when we get to the software. So I'm just going to quickly review the general linear model, which is commonly used for FNIRS analysis. So here we have the expected hemodynamic response function, also known as the HRF. This is the data of one FNIRS channel in response to a stimulus. So this is our stimulus period. This could be anything, a motor stimulus, audio, visual. And you'll notice the time course down here is in seconds. So the FNIRS response is based on a metabolic response of neurons firing. So this is occurring over the course of seconds rather than tens or hundreds of milliseconds, as is the case in EEG. So given the stimulus period, we have soon after we have an increase in oxyhemoglobin coming to a peak just after the stimulus period ends. And we also have a consequent decrease in deoxyhemoglobin. So typically oxy is represented in red and deoxy is represented in blue. Shortly after, the two cross paths and then they're going to return to baseline. That's not fully modeled out here, but that's what they would be doing. So this is the general pattern that we're looking for. Now keep in mind that the hemodynamic response does not look like this for every subject, and it's not going to look like this for across the head in an individual subject. This has been shown with many studies that there is a lot of individual variability in the hemodynamic response function. So with the general linear model application, we really just want to see this trend, this increase in oxy and this dip in deoxy. The shape might look a little bit different, the amplitude might be a bit different, but yes, at the end of the day, that is what we're focused on. We want to see that increase in oxy and that dip in deoxy. So modeling this data, this is the canonical HRF function. It comes to us from the fMRI world. And this is a model of that red curve from earlier, right? So if I go back, it's a very similar curve. So we take this expected response to a short stimulus. We convolve it with the actual duration of our stimulus. So the stimulus function is 0 when the stimulus is off in time and 1 when it's on. So if it's a 10-second stimulus, the stimulus function will be 1 for 10 seconds. And then we end up with our predicted data time course. So this is how we create our model visually. This is what's happening. And you would create this for both the oxy and the deoxy in that expected HRF. So mathematically, what's going on here? Well, we can create a model by saying that y equals the data from one FNIRS channel, x is equal to the predicted data, B1 is the coefficient that you use to fit the model to the data, and then you have to also include this baseline intercept term. So this is physiologically, this is basically the background activity that's happening just before stimulus onset. So with this equation, we're modeling this graph that we just saw. We're modeling this predicted data. We're seeing how well the data we record matches this model. And it's important to note that for every FNIRS channel and chromophore, there is an equation like this to be solved. But our model needs to be a little more complex. If we have multiple conditions, we're going to have multiple beta values. So this would be a beta value for condition 3, 2, and 1, and then the predicted time course for each of those conditions. We're also going to add this noise term. So we have this noise term because even with this predicted time course split up into all the conditions we have, our data isn't going to exactly fit our model. There's going to be a residual. There's going to be physiological noise, random noise happening. So we need to include this error term. Here's another visual representation. We have the data that we record. We have a condition 1 in green, condition 2 in red in time. We then model those conditions we have beta 1 and beta 2 over here using the canonical HRF function. We include this baseline term as well as this residual error term. So everything on the right side of the equation is equal to the left side of the equation, and we're trying to isolate beta 1 and beta 2. This tells us, how well our data fits our model. So there's a number of assumptions in the GLM, and an important one is that the noise term has a Gaussian distribution, as in it's completely random noise. Now this is not true by default. So FNIRS has high autocorrelation in the data. Physiological noise is at specific frequencies, such as heart rates at around 1 Hertz, respirations at 0.3 Hertz. And also motion artifacts distort the noise spectrum. They're heavy-tailed outliers. So here's a representation of the spread of the noise in FNIRS data. We want it to look like this Gaussian bell curve, but by default, it actually looks more like this black curve with the pink highlight on it. So what we need to do is we need to make that noise term more Gaussian looking and just random noise and clean out the noise at those specific frequencies. So one way to do that is using confound predictors. These are regressors of no interest that you include in your general linear model. So this is the sources of noise that you expect to see. You can use short channel data, heartbeat, the discrete cosine transform. This is essentially a low pass filter that's using low frequency cosines to take out linear drift in the signal. Excuse me, not linear drift, but low frequency drift in the signal. And you can also use data channels not in your region of interest as confound predictors. What are short channels? So I did mention that on the last slide. In case you're not familiar, here we have our source and detector sitting on our scalp. And a channel is formed by this light being sent in by the source and being received by the detector. The average path that a photon takes to get to this detector is known as the photon banana, and this probes the cortical tissue at point B. However, there is blood flow in the scalp at points A and C that is not related to our neurovascular coupling of interest, and it can contaminate the measurement from the cortex and significantly impact the data. So we can measure and regress out this component by putting a short channel detector very close to the source. And this measurement is known as short channels. And Eric, later on when we're collecting data, will be showing measurement with short channels. So in addition to those confound predictors, we can add some other preprocessing methods. There's various filters available, motion artifact correction. So the motion artifact correction that's used in Satori is called correlation-based signal improvement. It's from a Cui paper in 2010. It's based on the assumption that oxy and deoxyhemoglobin are anti-correlated, but if they are correlated, it's due to a motion artifact. So we can see that here. Here we have an FNIRS channel. It's of high quality in this area of the plot. HB oxy is plotted in red and deoxy is plotted in blue. And you can see that HB oxy is starting to go up, deoxy then correspondingly goes down. but all of a sudden we have this big shift and they both go down, and they're both completely positively correlated, whereas they had been negatively correlated. So this is what happens when you have a motion artifact. It's when the optoid is decoupled from the scalp. So the correlation-based signal improvement algorithm notices this and it corrects it. So this is the motion artifact correction algorithm that's available in Turbo-Satori. Okay, so what are we looking for? We've created a model for our observed activation and cleaned out the physiological measurement and noise with our various preprocessing and confound steps. So now our beta value truly reflects how well the observed data matches the model. And we'll go ahead and select beta as a variable of interest. Now, there's a number of other metrics you could use to coin this activation term. Within the general linear model framework, I mean, you could also use the support vector machine, but as I mentioned, we're just going to stick with this general linear model pipeline, and we're going to use beta as our metric to reflect activation. Okay, getting into Turbo-Satori itself. So I'm going to preview the analysis and go over the practical setup so that when we see it in action, we understand what's happening. So a note on Lab Streaming Layer. Lab Streaming Layer is a library of code that allows multiple applications to send and receive synchronous data streams and/or triggers. So this is what Turbo-Satori is going to use to connect with the NIRx data acquisition software. For Lab Streaming Layer to work, applications must be on the same network. So this could be on the same computer or different computers. So you could run your NIRx data acquisition software on one computer and run Turbo-Satori on another, as long as the computers share a network. NIRx data can be streamed as raw voltage or converted to oxy and deoxyhemoglobin. Turbo-Satori will pull the raw data. And as mentioned earlier, Turbo-Satori connects seamlessly to this LSL stream. So there's no scripting required, no headaches. It's as easy as the push of a button, as we'll see. Enabling LSL within the NIRx platform. So this is done automatically in Aurora. There's no extra steps you need to take. As soon as you hit record, the LSL stream is started. So Aurora is the data acquisition software for the NIRSport 2. For NIR star-based systems, so our NIR Scout and our NIRSport 1, it does need to be enabled. So this is done by going to configure hardware, data streaming, enable LSL, and you want to make sure that the raw data, is streamed. Okay, so the task we'll be using is a finger tapping task. I know you've probably seen this a lot by now, but it's important to start out with something that's familiar because we're going to be covering a lot of advanced things. So let's stick with something that's familiar and also creates quite a robust response. So the finger tapping task consists of a montage over the right and left motor cortex. This montage does include short channels that sit around each of the sources. The task itself, we have 10 seconds of left finger tapping followed by a 10-second rest period, 10 seconds of right finger tapping followed by a rest period. Now this is a bit of a shorter rest than usual. You'd like to usually use about 15 seconds to fully see the response return to baseline, but for time's sake, we've cut the rest period a bit short. Our hypothesis with the finger tapping task is that contralateral activation will be greater in each task. So we expect activation in channels in the right hemisphere to be greater than that of left channels during the left condition, and vice versa. So I mentioned earlier that there's a specific triggering sequence we'll need to use. With Turbo-Satori, we need to tell Turbo-Satori when to start the baseline measure. So since we're using a continuous wave FNIR system, we have to have an average value that we'll use to compute changes in oxy and deoxyhemoglobin. So all you have to do that is you send a trigger to Turbo-Satori. We're going to send a 1, and it will compute the baseline thereafter using 200 frames of data. Note that 1 will also be our stop trigger. So unlike a typical experiment with NIRx data, a NIRx data acquisition where you don't need to send a stop trigger, you just need to know the start and the duration. Here we have to send a stop trigger so that Turbo-Satori knows when to stop modeling the basis function. So a 2 is going to be sent for the left condition, the onset of left condition, and a 3 is going to be sent for the right condition. So bringing that all together in this diagram down here, we have the trigger number, the action, and the time. So we have this 30-second baseline period that's ushered in by this trigger of 1. We'll have a short countdown. Eric will be prompted to tap his left finger, and a 2 will be sent to Turbo-Satori. he'll be told to stop, and a 1 will be sent to Turbo Satori, followed by the right condition, rest, left condition, and so on. So our processing pipeline, first, Turbo Satori will receive the raw data in volts. It will convert the data for us to changes in oxy and deoxyhemoglobin, which is a unit of change in micromolars. The GLM filter will be applied. This includes the confound predictors. So we'll include a linear confound predictor, discrete cosines, heartbeat, and short channels. Then we'll have additional processing steps of a low pass filter and motion correction. And then finally we'll run the general linear model. So you'll notice that there's kind of 2 GLM steps. The first one is a GLM filter where we're taking out the confounds. The second one is where we have our now cleaned data and we compute the beta values. Okay, and without further ado, let's have a look at Turbo Satori. So I'm clicking on the application here. I'm going to be prompted for either real-time mode or Simul mode. So starting out, I'm going to show you Simul mode to give you a lay of the land, and then we'll see data collection with Eric in real time. So this is loading up. We're going to select a previously recorded data set. When we hit start in the top right corner, we'll be prompted to load a previous data set. If this was the real-time application, we'd be prompted to connect to an LSL stream. So here I'm prompted to load a .sri, a .hdr, or a .NIRx file. The .sri file is native to Turbo Satori, and it's created after you first run the data through Turbo Satori. The .hdr and .NIRx are created by NIRx. So you'll select either one to run previously recorded data. So I'm going to select an old data set. This is actually a finger tapping data set. There'll be activation for left and right conditions. But I want to stress right now, I'm not focused on the data. I just kind of want to show you the user interface. So you might notice if you've seen screenshots of Turbo Satori before, this is a light theme. You can use the dark theme if you prefer. If you come over to view, use dark theme, so that makes the background black. But I prefer this white background. So if we go ahead and select a data channel, we can start to see that data pour in. We can change the rate at which the data is read by using this data read frequency meter. So since this is previously recorded data, I don't have to read it in at the same rate that it was actually recorded. I can speed it up. I just used these little navigation bars. These are handy to kind of focus if you want to focus in on a certain screen to use. You also have the option of easily switching between these panels using these buttons up here. So let's go ahead and take a look at this channel time course. So here we have the data from one channel being plotted. Oxyhemoglobin is in red and deoxyhemoglobin is in blue. And I am using single channel selection mode right now. So if you go to tools and unclick single channel selection mode, you'll be able to select multiple channels. You'll note that now the channels, HBoxy and deoxy are the same color, but deoxy is a lighter trace. And that's done so that if you plot multiple channels, you can tell what the data is from individual channels. If I'm interested in looking at multiple channels, I'd probably turn off one of the chromophores to just focus on. Right now, I've just made it so that I just look at oxyhemoglobin, and that can be done by clicking these buttons up here of show data. I could also here change the basis functions that I'm seeing. So here, given that triggers were sent, we had a start trigger and a stop trigger. The basis function is then convolved with the stimulus function, and we end up with our predicted time course. So this is what we want to see, our data to be modeled as. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the hemodynamic response function looks slightly different for everyone. And also amplitude is really not so critical. Certainly not absolute amplitude. We don't have to have this exactly match this shape. What we do want to see is a general increase, and we do want to see more activation in certain channels relative to other channels. So we know that, if a channel is right over the motor cortex, we expect to see a greater relative amplitude compared to those that are not. I could kind of specify which conditions I want to look at using these buttons down here. So you see that I take away the basis function using these buttons down here. Let's see, I should also note this data is completely pre-processed. Our pipeline that we discussed earlier has been applied. I'll walk through that later. So I went ahead and paused the data for a moment. I want to take us out of this view and come back, and now I want to have a look at the event-related average view. So I'm clicking this button over here. So this is very similar to your block average view from a typical offline analysis. I'm going to remove the error intervals, and I'm going to remove one of the conditions. I just want to look at the response for one condition. And I'm just going to focus on one channel. So I'm going to go back to single channel selection mode. And I'm going to show my deoxyhemoglobin again. So here we have the average response to this condition plotted. I could plot the error intervals if I wanted to see the spread of this response. Yeah, so that's this block average view is kind of a nice, another nice indication of the activation for this channel. And I could plot multiple if I wanted to, as shown earlier. So I'm going to continue reading in the data here. Let's see, I'm going to go to this view now. So this is our montage view. Satori has read it in from the data file. So we see the layout of sources and detectors. I'm using my mouse wheel to scroll in on the screen here. So I can easily select channels with this view. Another nice thing about this view is I can see an indicator of channel quality topographically. So I can see which channels look good on my montage because of these dashed lines. So these dashed lines indicate the presence of heartbeats. If you have dashed lines, that means heartbeat is detected, and heartbeat's going to be a very good indicator of signal quality. If heartbeat is not detected, then this channel is too noisy to be used. And this will be critical for neurofeedback because you generally focus on a couple of channels. So you want to make sure that you're using a channel for your classification or your neurofeedback that is of high quality. You'll also see if heartbeat is detected, you'll see this heart symbol in the channel. In the list, you'll also see the actual heart rate value down here in the bottom right corner. So that was me kind of focusing on the general linear model. As I mentioned, there are other metrics you can use. For example, we can have a look at channel correlation. So this is a metric that could be of interest. So this is simply the Pearson's correlation value across channels. So if I click on a certain channel, it's going to visually show me which channels have the higher correlation values based on this kind of heat map. So channels that are redder are going to be more highly correlated with this channel compared to channels that are not as red. I can see the actual correlation values in this channel pane view, and I'm told the values for HB, oxy, HB, deoxy, and total HB. So that is another cool and really easy to use feature. So now I'll just quickly review the preprocessing. So we have a couple of preprocessing over here on this left panel, excuse me, this right panel. You can preprocess the raw wavelength data or oxy and deoxy data. You can only do one at a time. So we're going to preprocess the oxy data. We're checking off the option for GLM filter. So this will apply our confound predictors, as we discussed earlier in the presentation, what those are. And there's a separate panel for declaring those confound predictors, and I'll show you that in a moment. Various filtering options. You can see Butterworth, Chebyshev, elliptic, and so on. And you can declare the type of filter you'd like to implement with this box down here. So we're applying a low pass filter, and we have the order and cutoff frequency here. We're also going to check off motion correction. So we're applying that CBSI algorithm. And note, a nice thing, if you hover over some of these boxes, it'll tell you the actual publication that's used for these algorithms. So that's a nice feature. Now we'll have to stop the reading of the data to have a look at the general linear model dialog. So coming over here to tools, analysis, general linear model. This is where our confound predictors live. So this is where we declare the confound predictors that we want to use. I've checked off linear confound, high pass, DCT, heartbeat, and add short distance channels as confound predictors. I won't go into these other ones. Again, I just encourage you, if you have specific questions, please send them in the question and answer box, and we'll be sure they're answered. But right now, we're just going to focus on this specific pipeline. Additionally, this is where you decide what your basis function is going to be. So by default, it's the 2 gamma HRF, which, as I mentioned, comes to us from the fMRI world. However, you can use a mean measured response. So the idea here is to pilot the data with the subject ahead of time, determine what their average response is. You'll then create this EHR file, which the user manual will tell you how to create, but that's going to be a model of the response for that subject. And so you then use the conditions, the subject's own response as their basis function. So that's a pretty nice feature, but we'll be sticking with the 2 gamma HRF. Okay, and that is all for this walkthrough. We're now ready to actually collect some data with Eric. So Eric, I'm going to invite you back on, and thank you. And I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll make you presenter, Eric. Could you speak? I just want to make sure I can hear you. I can't hear you at the moment. No, nope. Okay. Well, it's not a big deal. You can still hear me, correct? Okay, there's a bit of an echo now, I think. No, okay, good, great, thank you. So I'm going to give you screen control. Change presenter to Eric. I'm requesting keyboard and mouse control. Okay, so great, we can see your screen there. Okay, so Eric has Turbo Satori opened. This is the real-time application. You can see it's very similar to the Simul mode. But we're just going to minimize this for now. We want to go ahead and get our data recording started. So Eric, if you could go ahead and place the cap on your head. So right now, Eric is using the NIRx 2 to do this measurement. The NIRx 2 uses the Aurora FNIRS data acquisition software. So he's placing the cap on his head. We're going to go ahead and select this configuration. And when Eric is ready, he'll give me a thumbs up and we can start the signal optimization. Ready? All right. So here, the source brightness is being set optimally for each channel so that you get the highest signal quality in all channels for this particular setup. And it's just parsing through here and everything looks good. So the signal optimization is a really nice objective measure of signal quality, but it's always good to actually go ahead and preview the data to see it visually. And I'm coming over here now to the recording pane. I'm hitting preview. I'm going to hit start and switch to the line plot view. So what we're looking for here really is heart rate. That's going to be our best indicator of signal quality. And heart rate is going to be that 1 hertz quick oscillation that we're seeing. And if I scroll through, I do see it in most of these channels. S5, D5 could use maybe a little work. I think maybe just adjusting. Okay, we'll have to go ahead and recalibrate because the probes have been moved, but that's no problem. That's a pretty quick process. So I'm going to hit stop, preview. I'm going to come back to signal optimization and re-optimize. So here we have a balance basically between saturation and signal level. So we want to make sure that we have the best window, and setting the source brightness ensures that. Okay, so now coming over here to back to the recording pane, I'm going to hit preview. Okay, yes, our data is definitely looking a lot better. We can see heart rate in all our channels. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to stop the preview. I'm going to open up the paradigm. So we are using PsychoPy for this paradigm. And yeah, we'll see that loaded up in a second here. So there is a specific order we'll need to start this recording with. First, we need to open up the LSL stream in PsychoPy. So PsychoPy is using the LSL stream to send triggers, and we need to first get this stream open for Aurora to find it before we hit record. So I'm just getting this started. Okay, and we're going to see a prompt that the LSL stream is open and it's time to start recording in Aurora. So I'm going to minimize this and come back to Aurora. And I'm going to start to record now. Okay. And now we can open up the stream in Satori. Okay, so just like before, I'm going to use the start button, but here I'll be prompted for an LSL stream rather than an old data file. So I'm going to click OK. And now we have our data streaming in. So you'll see the montage is slightly different. It's an 8x8 montage, not a 16:16. And we also have added short channels. So I'll just zoom in on this. So short channels are represented as these little detectors sitting around the source. So Eric has those embedded in his cap, and they will help regress out the short channel compound. Okay, and I believe we are ready to go. So Eric, I'm going to hit start. And you can hear, you'll be able to hear the prompts, correct? So I don't have to show them on the screen. Eric? I think Eric might have trouble hearing me right now with PsychoPy, but not to worry, we'll keep this kind of going on in the background. Okay, so I'm going to focus in here while the baseline measure is running. So there's a 30-second delay and we're waiting for the triggers to come in. I'm going to open up the neurofeedback window here. So we're just going to be using a simple thermometer to show us, to reflect the beta values and what they are. And we're going to set the threshold for this thermometer to be to 0.3. So previously I've recorded data with Eric, and this is his optimal amplitude here. Okay, and we have the onset of condition 1. So condition 1 has started. We're starting to see the data pour in, the response for this condition. So condition 1 is a left finger tapping. Now, and Eric can hear the prompt, so I'm just going to put away this this window. So condition 1 is the left finger tapping. This channel is over the right motor cortex. So we're going to expect to see greater activation for the right hand condition as compared to the left hand condition. So starting out, we see the response for the left condition was not very strong, not really much happening here at all. But we do see something occurring for the, let's kind of zoom in a little bit. We do see something happening here for the right hand condition for this left channel. We start to see oxy increase and deoxy decrease. Okay, and let's keep this moving over here. And so as I mentioned, amplitude, this amplitude does not have to exactly match this. We're just looking for that overall pattern. And the thermometer is also going to show us when oxy increases to a significant value for this condition. Okay, so this condition started again, and we did see another increase in oxy and a consequent increase in the thermometer. Now let's look for this again. This is another left-hand condition, and so we're not really seeing activation. Deoxy is actually up, and oxy is down. And now we'll have the final right-hand condition. And so look here for the thermometer to increase as this condition really takes hold. Okay, and yeah, there we have it. There we have the neurofeedback from Eric's finger tapping task. We could certainly optimize this a bit better for Eric. I think, you know, maybe some webinar day jitters are leading to a little reduced concentration for this response. It was a bit stronger when we practiced it. But nonetheless, the trend is there, and we understand the output, right? We ran this task. We were looking for the oxy beta value, and we expected it to be greater for the right-hand condition as compared to the left-hand condition, since this channel is over the left motor cortex. And that is all. That is this preview, this analysis pipeline that we're showing you in Satori.